Hello and welcome to another episode of the CollabTalk podcast, where we discuss the convergence of technology, business productivity, and collaboration culture. My guest today is Joel Oleson. Hello, Joel.
Hey.
Microsoft MVP and RD and enterprise architect at Sony PlayStation. And Joel is also an important part of today's discussion. He's also part of an elite group of people who have visited all 195, right? Is that the number?
193, 195, however you want to calculate it. Basically, there's 193 that are full UN members, and there's a couple voting members, and then there's those disputed countries. And the good news is I've been to all of them, including the disputed ones. So
Yeah.
that makes it easy.
Well, it's perfect for today's topic. We're talking about how modern work and collaboration differ across cultures. So I know that, so welcome, Joel. I know
Thank
that
you.
like Joel and I met back in 2004. It's funny, and I share different parts of that story in different presentations that I give, but I had written a white paper back in early 2004 talking about the future of SharePoint. And there were some other folks on the product team. I don't think I had met you at that time, but it was August when I came up. And I had met you, and I'm trying to remember who else said swing by, come over to campus, come visit.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like the net of that conversation was, you're like, look at what we're doing. It was, in 2000, August of 2004, the 2003 version was live, and you guys are started to work on what would become then the 2007 version. And you guys were all excited about it. And I told you, this is garbage. Let me show
Yeah. I
you
remember that
what I've been
conversation.
working on, which I had launched with this company E2 Open, and some of what we
Yeah.
were doing. But anyway, it's funny. 2 years later, I went to work for Microsoft, and Joel and I, for like 2-3 months before you went over to the product team from
Yeah.
that
In
group,
fact, you
shared an
may or
office.
may not know that I flipped your resume over to that team.
The product team. Well, I'm sure it was difficult to
To
get in
the
there at the
IT,
time.
team.
Oh, yeah, no, yeah. Oh, I do remember that. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, no. So it's no, so we've known each other for a while, and I know that even then, I don't know when did you officially start your travels?
I count my first major trip as this trip in 2001 to Paris, where I was working in IT, and it was kind of this first SharePoint show for Microsoft IT,
Mhm.
where things were still, it was before the 2001 release, but Microsoft was still trying to determine what does global SharePoint mean from an IT perspective. So this was an IT show, and they locked us all up in this chateau in outside of Paris. And it started with my manager's manager comes into my office and he's like, "Hey, do you have a passport?" I'm like, "No, but I can get one." And from there, it kind of launched this, "Hey, here's the world." And after seeing Paris and then only getting kind of a taste of it, but realizing work can make these happen, and Microsoft was kind of big on the, hey, if you're traveling for work and you decide that you want to add your own hotel or whatever at the end, you can. And it was from that trip that I found out most of the people that went from these various places, they met up with their spouses after, and they went and saw Paris proper and kind of made a trip out of it. I thought I was being good by just going and coming back and getting like one evening or one kind of day in Paris where I kind of snuck out with a
Yeah,
couple of guys on a day where I wasn't speaking and didn't have anything going on, and felt like how do I make this my job? And so I leaned in on that idea of speaking at conferences. I ended up, like, a couple years later, maybe it was even the next year, speaking in New Orleans at a tech ed, and then there was an IT forum in Barcelona, and then I just got on this circuit of every year trying to hit whatever tech ed Europe and tech ed in the US, and then I did a tech ed 2003 in Japan, and from there it was all to the races. It was like, oh man, there's a tech ed in Australia. Oh, there's one in New Zealand, and there's one in Malaysia, and oh, South Africa. So it was like hitting all the tech eds. And then it was, before long, it was, hey, there's these major tech eds, but guess what? There's other conferences. So it was then networking with other speakers, networking with the people who run these events. And I started going to that one in Malaysia every year.
Yeah.
And then I would go visit the technical communities nearby. So I'd go to Thailand or Vietnam or Indonesia, and that kind of idea, just kind of expanding. And ultimately, we came up with this idea. Some of the other speakers that I was working with, it was like, hey, there's all these underserved markets, other places that don't have conferences, that if we took and brought a SharePoint Saturday, or if we brought what we called sharing the point, let's take technology to the places that are underserved, that never get any conferences, and are sharing the point in Argentina and Chile, and on in South America. And then we did kind of different editions. Like in Asia, we were doing, sure, we'll go do the thing in Australia, but then while we're there, let's go pop over and do an event in Vietnam and China and Philippines, and ultimately kind of doing this event, which eventually took us to that event in Antarctica, where we met some researchers and talked about our tech, and then also spent some time with the penguins, leading to some viral videos that with the penguins, which was awesome.
Yeah, that it's funny too because I'm trying to remember what year that was, but I think that aligned where my company was acquired by Metalogics, and we had products sold into that research team in Antarctica. It's like we were the only third party
Wow.
tool being used in that SharePoint instance down there. Um, but
That's
yeah, so
awesome.
we were happy about that. No, but it's a that idea too for people who haven't done a lot of work travel like that. As I did as a chief evangelist, would always try to bundle those things in. And I know some people from the outside, they look at that and say, it's like, well, you're just trying to go and extend this time. It's like, look, if I'm going to travel around to the other side of the planet, if I can stay a little bit longer and go speak at 2 user groups and meet with some other
Yeah.
clients and stuff,
Yeah.
I get more value out of all that time and effort just to get over to that part of the world.
Yep. In fact, it was when I was working at Quest Software, where I was speaking at some European conference, and I wanted to go speak at a user group in Egypt. And I was basically asking my boss, I was like, hey, over the weekend, I'm going to go speak at this. I want to go speak to the user group in Egypt. So I'm going to take this time. And he's like, no, no, no. You don't have to take that on personal time. You can actually, we want to reach that user group just like you do. We'll pay for your hotel and for your flight. I was like, it was kind of a game changer for me, because my boss already saw the value in, hey, these other technical audiences that are maybe in markets that are not that top tier that Microsoft kind of focuses on, that they ultimately trickle down. Back when I was on the product team, there was kind of your top markets where the product team would focus, but then there was that secondary. It's like, oh, the field will focus on those things.
Yeah.
But from a community perspective, I felt like it was super valuable to connect with the folks in Dubai or the folks in Egypt and Qatar and so on, that those Turkey, those more secondary markets, you find that from a community perspective, we could fire up people, we give them a voice, and they could essentially connect their entire community to the global community. And that was extremely powerful, especially at that time where people would feel like they're so alone, and that their concerns and their problems were unique. And it's like, no, 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 you're not alone. We
Yeah.
all have those same issues. And if we can actually create this kind of collective conscience of knowledge and information sharing, we're all going to rise higher just by, in the sharing of it, you learn more because people give you feedback on what you're sharing.
When you were at Microsoft and starting to do those travels and get to some of these regions, did that travel and these interactions, did it change your perspective on business and collaboration?
Absolutely. The more places I went, the broader my mind opened. Essentially, every new place brings new insights, brings new cultures, brings new considerations. And I just take an example. When I was in the Congo, just like a couple of years ago, we did a small event. There was some French folks who ended up flying in as well. Like they were our connection for the little group there in Republic of Congo,
Mhm.
and we had this little event, and we had some panels, and we I was talking about Gen AI and how what it was doing in in the US, but their thoughts and concerns and ideas around it, and especially as it relates to say bandwidth or remote access and what happens in the cloud versus what happens locally. I always appreciated conversations I'd have with folks in South Africa where it's like, hey, it's not in their data center, they've got to go remote, and there was optimization we could do on our side to improve that, or to talk about from a Gen AI perspective, it's like, where does the model need to run? Those perspectives are extremely valuable when you start talking about culture and you start talking about the differences and insights that brings by thinking about things more globally rather than just locally.
How should we think about collaboration globally? I mean, because it's fairly common now, and this is another one of those things. I always say, like, one of the positive sides of the pandemic is that a lot of organizations that thought that they couldn't have a multi region really support that, and culturally and technically be able to support that dispersed workforce. A lot of organizations are like, hey, we can actually do this and do a good job at this. So how
I,
should companies think about that?
I think that's let me share this insight. I did notice that so much of our communication these days happens on these social platforms. So if I take the Facebook algorithm and experience as an example, there was a time there where it didn't really care about time zones so much. So your conversation and the algorithm didn't care whether that person was on the other side of the planet. Those conversations really revolved really, really well. And it wasn't just interactions. The algorithm would essentially put into their feed stuff that happened a little bit, at a different time zone. Then they tweaked it, and I felt like my audience became so much more narrow, and that the conversations became less global. And the insights that I gained by having folks that were actually living in the Middle East, when we're talking about Middle East challenges and solutions, it's a game changer. If I'm having conversations in a vacuum or in a small little box in a bubble versus being able to talk about in modern sense, if we're talking about what's happening in Palestine, or we're talking about what's happening in Ukraine, those conversations are so much richer if you have somebody who with boots on the ground.
Yeah.
And I take that that example and say, in technology, if you've got a remote user who feels alone or feels like they've got bandwidth issues, and then they represent that perspective, it's such a valuable component to the conversation. When Office 365 was first released, the voice from South Africa was extremely valuable to us, saying, hey, is this working? What are the things we've got to do to make sure that it gets to the end of the row?
Yeah. Well, that's something too that starting at work with a former employer, but like in the middle of the pandemic, like I already knew everybody at this company, and so I had no problem with it. And they were hiring a bunch of other people that didn't have that background, didn't know the ecosystem that we worked in, and I just thought how incredibly difficult it is for these folks to just to be digital all the time and never having physically met any of the people that hired them and that they're working with. How important that face-to-face time is, you can still be spread out. You can still be virtual, but there
Absolutely.
have to be moments. There have to be like on a quarterly basis or twice a year, or, pull everybody together, kind of all hands with at least with your working team.
Face to face is not replaceable. Like I know that we come up with tools and solutions to address it, and I think every time we do, we get closer to that idea, but it's just not the same. And I say that as somebody who loves to put on the helmet and jump into VR and be standing next to somebody from Germany and talking about a virtual event and feeling like they're right there. It's
Right.
still, hey, let's go walk to this virtual whiteboard and start doing some whiteboarding. That's great. But it's often when the meeting stops and you're walking in the hallway that the real conversation happens. And it's the, hey, you're in Japan and they're all like, hey, let's go get some Korean barbecue. They start drinking some sake, and then the real conversations happen.
Right. Well,
It's
conferences is the exact same
happens.
way. I know
Absolutely.
that there were, again, reasons for that with the pandemic, but there like, let's talk Microsoft with the various conferences. There are some senior leaders that just thought this is fantastic. We're getting 10x the number of people participating in this conferences. So instead of having 15,000, they have 150,000 people
Right.
that are logged in at some point to that. And they're like, well, we're getting our marketing message out to more people that are part of this. I said, yeah, but there's no, on the flip side of that, there's no partner to partner interactions happening. They're like, oh, it happens. And like, no, it's not. It's
No,
not
no,
happening.
no. In fact, I think that the vendor space has very much been damaged by that. Like the expo halls that used to happen in a major way, and the connection between the influencers and the vendors and their ability to access customers through influencers, it's fundamentally changed.
Yeah.
Like there's a smaller set of vendors who've survived a lot of that, and we've all suffered as a result of the ecosystem just kind of drying up as a result of it not having the juices that kind of flow from those kinds of collaboration and events.
Well, I know that's kind of a side topic. My understanding is that there's some newer leadership at Microsoft, at least, that is saying the same thing. It's like, we need to go back to the old way of doing conferences. And
Yeah,
there's a push
yeah.
for that direction. But yeah, it's interesting to look at and try to have conversations back on the technology standpoint of, what elements of collaboration really are local, regional, and which pieces can be universal. And so when I think of universal, I think of like the platform that we're all on there, but we're not going to a lot of these tools, talking about SharePoint, Microsoft Teams, but all the other technologies, Slack and things that are out there,
Sure,
and the other
sure.
video conference. Um, a lot of that stuff is to augment where the real work and the relationships, the connections are happening. It's like that they are not where the connections, they are augmenting, supporting those discussions and those relationships.
I think about MVP Summit. You mentioned MVP, and it's MVP as an award is an amazing recognition of contributions to the community. And as somebody who's an influencer, that MVP Summit and the value it brings of, let's bring all the influencers together and let's have some open conversations, is extremely valuable, because now you're actually connecting experts to experts, and the networking that happens is extremely valuable. And then Microsoft is able to kind of share their, hey, here's our updates, here's our roadmap, please give us feedback. And I know that feedback loop is more powerful than the money they're spending to put on this event. That the feedback they're getting is extremely valuable, and there's a lot of mistakes that they can avoid, very valuable, expensive mistakes they would make otherwise.
Just I often say that, you know, like going to conferences, going to the MVP summit, going to these events, I'm less interested in the topics being presented, and especially now with the hybrid model, where so much of it, like, look, I'll go read I'll watch the video, I'll read the presentation, I'll get an AI summary to focus into what do I need to know in these sessions for that. I love there's, as you mentioned, the hallway conversations, but I also love to hear from customers and partners. What questions are they asking? Because they're feeling real world pains, or there's gaps in solutions and things that are out there. You know, that kind of, I'm more interested in the MVP summit is like, what questions are my peers? Are they asking? And be like, okay, yeah, I have that question too. Or like, I never even thought of that.
Yep.
That kind of interaction is just, again, you can't duplicate that
And
within the
I
pure digital.
remember early in my tech career finding out that there's a lot of companies, they pay for one conference a year. And so it's kind of this risk, but you're like, okay, which conference do I want to pick? And what can I do to convince my boss to let me go? And there was a time there where I was working at this tech company, and there was a group that went, and they came back and said, you know what? We would have been much better off just going to a training course. It was just a marketing event. And that hurt our ability to go to conferences the next year. And so then I kind of battled that and convinced my boss, no, no, no. I promise to do a write up. I'll put together a white paper. I'll contribute to our roadmap, whatever happens to be. So I get sent to the conference, and I realized the biggest takeaways from that conference is not necessarily, oh, I learned how to do this tool better or whatever. And if you're going to a conference because of the what you're going to learn, yeah, you're probably going to get a lot of that online. If you just hit the keynote, you're going to get all the announcements, and often those keynotes are what's online, and then you can basically mine the feed on X or whatever. You can mine, okay, what were the other things that are happening in those sessions? But it's the networking you can't make up for.
Right.
Those relationships, and even a lot of those socials that happen in the evening. It's now you've got a connection to the product team because of that person you met at the booth, or now you met that partner who had the solution to the problem that you had in the expo hall, and you met the peer who has the same problem as you, but who actually had an answer to it that you didn't get from a speaker, but you actually got from one of your peers who is maybe 6 months ahead of you.
Yeah.
And it's that collection of things that end up making the whole thing valuable. And I've been in so many sessions where maybe I'm speaking and someone says, this one session paid for the whole conference.
Yep.
And I've been on both sides of that, where it's like there was one session that paid for the whole conference, or one conversation that paid for the whole conference. And it is those kind of valuable things of building that network, and the rich collaboration that you get that happens around the world.
And for folks that are watching or listening to this too, here we're talking about conferences. This aspect, this is all. This is it's just another version of what we're talking about in modern work collaboration. And how does organic collaboration? How do we work better together? And part of that is adjusting for each of the smaller networks or projects that we're working on. It might be slightly different for this collection of people, working on this project over here than we are for this larger. This is the business unit. We collaborate in a different way. There's a book that I used to refer people to. It's older now, so it's like 20 plus years old. That was around communities. I'll have to find the link to it and put it in my notes here. But it was that the idea of do you go and you speak to every community, the same way? Like, no, of course not. If I'm going to speak to the global community of a company, let's say we're a company of 100,000 employees. If I'm going to go out and speak to 100,000 people, then it's going to be certain things I'm going to convey to that large of an audience, certain messages, certain tools that I'll use. If I then go and I'm over in this business unit, I work in the marketing, department, that business unit. again, different tools, different language, different rules of what to communicate. If I'm then my project team, it's going to be different than my 2 direct reports. That'll be different than each one of those. All of them are collaboration. One size does not fit all of those things. And then there's the added layer of geographical, space of and differences between cultures. Have you noticed any like major differences between like the way that you were working over on the west coast of the US compared to some of these regions that these other countries you were visiting?
Yeah, yeah. In fact, I'll give you a couple of quick examples. One, when I was at Quest Software, we had a development team that was in Russia, like in St. Petersburg. And I had a peer who's like, hey, let me pull you aside. When you talk to the Russians, they're actually going to sometimes even say something that's wrong and see if you will call them on it. And the credibility with them is your ability to defend yourself and stand up for yourself, and you'll have much more credibility with them if you cross them
Yeah.
and essentially say, no, this is correct, this is right. And let's take that same example and let's take it to Japan. I work in a company now where there's a Japanese population, and you have to be very, very sensitive about face and
Yes.
about keeping face. And what I'm talking about is, if we're talking about something and they say something that's not correct, how I correct them is extremely important. And I cannot do that even on the call. And if I do, I have to use kid gloves. I have to be very careful about how I not embarrass that person, because that will also affect my standing with them and my relationship to them and their peers and anyone else who's on the call, where those are diametrically opposed.
Yeah. I have to say, so only because I manage some of those customer and partner relationships, I've helped 2 companies that I've worked for in my career open offices in Japan, both from the US going over and dealing with that. And the culture, I love the Japanese culture, but that was one of the most strikingly different cultures from, especially Silicon Valley, Bay Area culture. In the US, the only culture that most closely aligns with that, the Bay Area working culture that in my experience has been Boston, where they're very much like that. It's very driven, forceful, like that style. So I noticed the differences between working in, moving up and working for companies in Seattle and then in Boston, and working for German and Dutch companies, like the differences between them, working for having a CEOs from Australia. That one, I think Sydney culture is also very close to the Bay Area, culture stuff. But yeah, that you just I had to be careful and change my style with each of those constituencies.
Yeah. And I think that as well, you kind of learn the ability to, how much warmth do you bring into a conversation, and how do you build your credibility and building relationships. And especially when it's remote, it's so hard sometimes to really understand, is my message being, how do I make sure that they're understanding what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And I think about like that Microsoft culture of, you get in a room and you got to beat it up, and if that person, you got to push them a certain amount, and then they got to push you back a certain amount, and then you find that happy medium of like, and if you're not used to that there's a culture of, somebody else might see, no, you guys were arguing.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, that
was passion.
That was actually a discussion.
Yeah, it was discussion. Yeah. Well, that's what I step it up a level, and that was the Boston interactions
Yep.
where
Yep.
we could yell at each other, so they're just passionate,
Yes.
about
Yes.
it. Be like,
Passion.
all right, we're done. Hey, let's go grab lunch. All right, let's go.
It's funny how many times my wife will even say, "Who was that you were yelling at?" It's like, no, no, no. That
That
was
was our
my
son.
boss, and I was helping him understand
Yeah,
this situation.
yeah. You don't know your own son? What do you do?
Yeah, exactly.
No, but I've had the exact same conversation with my wife, and some of those like, oh no, we're fine. You
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
but yeah, it's a. I mean, I realize that there's kind of a, it's an emotional
Passion.
IQ thing as
Yeah,
well,
yeah,
to realize that, hey, this is it's kind of a know your audience, to know that, hey, I need to adjust my style for this. I was going to bring up, like, I don't know if you've ever worked with like an Israeli engineering team.
yeah,
And so
yeah.
that was one where, again, it's like if you're not to the point and focus and direct on it, and they look at it, like in my experience, like they're looking at that as weakness. Like, what are you talking? Like, be very specific about this. So
I
some
love that.
great
I love that.
experiences and also some very frustrating experiences with remote engineering teams. I managed for about a year a team in Western India, and was able to get over there once back in 2010 and work
Wow.
with the team, which made all the difference.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I found early on working with the Indian culture, so much of it is a very heady thing. They're very, very smart, and that ability to essentially convey the intelligence, and that the difference between our cultures is we're very independent thinkers, and we're very thinking about where do we want to go, what do we want to do. And both in India and China, you find more of that kind of collective experience, or kind of social. And I don't want to add politics into it, but essentially it's that idea that there's bigger, broader thinking, and that we need to spend more time thinking through the solution. How can you come up with that? Where did you come up with that from? And why do you think it's okay for you to drive that? So a lot of the time when I'm working with an Indian audience, it's kind of like it's important that I show my backing and show why I'm making the decisions that I'm making, um, because the collective need for the organization is more of a major consideration. It takes more time and thought to put together some of the whys on the why and the how, and then some of those. If you could build up some of that consensus beforehand, now when you're helping them understand why, it's going to go a lot smoother.
Yeah, two things really quick. One is, we were just mentioned India. I have to mention, I think it was back in the early, so like probably 2011, 2012, where you and another fellow friend and fellow MVP Michael Knoll went to
Yeah.
the rat temple. One of my
Yes.
favorite videos. Like, it just like anyway, that's one, like, you need to go resurface that, bump it to the top, push it through social again. Remember this memory,
Yeah. Yeah.
that was pretty intense,
We'll have
just
to
to
put that
watch
in the
that.
chat notes. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. No, the other thing I was going to say is that it actually, I mean, that trying to, if you've got your message, like I just used Chat GPT today, or I wrote out an email, and this
Yep.
is like a simple use case where I knew that I needed to reach out to this person, and that there were some sensitivities around this. And so I said, like, can you help me reword this email so it fits, it adjusts for, like, here's the concerns of this way. And it's still my words, my notes in there, but
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
reformatted them like perfect, tweaked a couple things, but pretty close to perfect. But that's actually something that you can leverage AI to in the collaboration, is to, um, I love this thing, like that, where it doesn't send emails right away, that there's like the delayed, that feature's been in there for a few years
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
But also then to add on with an AI to have it suggest based on destination for region or culture or individual or sensitivity of that topic to relook and potentially reword outgoing messages and make suggestions based on those things. I've not seen that automated yet, but you can
No, neither
certainly
have I.
use a like Chat GPT to go in and take into
Cultural
consideration.
sensitivities are very valuable, and I remember when we had some exchange students who came to our school in Idaho, and I was like, they were talking about this write up they had about how to interact with students in Idaho or in America, and there was some sensitivities that they essentially had put into it around, hey, as a European, you need to be aware that Americans think that they won the Vietnam War, was one example. And it was like,
I don't think I've ever met
whoa.
an American that thinks that, but
And
okay.
I think back in those days, and I remember kind of thinking about that idea of even what my dad had said about that time period, where he's like, well, yeah, we didn't really lose, we just left. It was that kind of attitude.
Yeah,
And it's not that I need to get into the politics of it. It was
yeah,
more of a European perspective of it was a total disaster, and the American perspective, who a very conservative perspective, might have been, yeah, we shouldn't have been there, but we backed out. We didn't lose. Yes, it looked like we lost, but we just
yeah.
left, or something to that effect. It's different perspectives.
Well, it's interesting too. I mean, because there are differences, and certainly in the ways that different cultures, build trust across team, how they share information, how they think about, uh, uh, like the security and governance aspects of their collaboration activities. All those
Yep.
things can be different as well. And it's funny because we think about with everything that we go through over here in the U.S. Um, we have, and we think that sometimes we have relatively strong guidance and rules around that. But again, you ask other parts of the world, they're like, no, America is terrible at a lot of those
Hmm.
things.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. I wanna bring up the idea of Gen AI adoption. That there's some people, they think of Gen AI as being, oh, here's a tool that's going to help me write my emails better, and it's like, and so I don't need that. I can write my emails just fine. It's this idea that the Gen AI is going to help them, or going to replace their job, rather than really positioning it as a tool, and our ability to seize that tool and figure out how to use that tool to be more productive. And I find that even in adoption of Gen AI, it's like, how do we dangle that carrot in the right way that people can understand this is actually going to help you be more productive?
It,
Um,
I see that's one reason I say this a lot, but why I think Microsoft's branding of Copilot was brilliant. It's the
yeah.
Copilot, it's not the
Yes.
pilot. It
Right.
doesn't
Right.
replace the human. It like, are there tasks that can be fully automated? Sure, we've been doing workflow and a lot of workflow automation for a long time, and this is like that next step, and there'll be more that it can do. And when you have agents speaking to agents and knowing
Yeah.
if I request something and the agent I'm asking doesn't know how to do it, but it knows the other agents and can go and find out who can do that thing and then give me the result I want. But then the whole point of all that is not that we're um, just makes me kind of smile thinking about a conversation I had years ago in Finland. Was speaking to a user group and was chatting afterwards. There's the young guy who was talking about, we were talking about AI uh, and robotics and kind of like the future. And he said, I see the future is like where like AI is doing all of this for us, and then humans just sit back in luxury. And I laughed. I said, boy, you don't know many humans. Like
Yeah.
that's not human nature.
One of my
For
one of
that.
my favorite kind of recent quotes as it relates to looking into that future like that was, we know that, OpenAI or so, anyway, these models, that the coding agent or the coder is somewhere around the top 50 or so. in the world now,
Hmm.
and that there's the expectation that it'll be the best by the end of the year. Imagine how much code can and will be written, and that idea that if you've got all that code, who's going to write those specs? Who's going to be stitching that code together? And something that Mark on Andreessen had said was like, he expects in 10 years there'll be 10 times as many developers as there is now.
Yeah.
And that kind of blew my mind, or kind of expanded my mind around the idea of, well, if we've got AI as the best coder, maybe we'll spend less time troubleshooting bugs, and actually instead kind of stepping up and being that one who kind of stitches together and is figuring out how to pull these things together, but also spending more time on integration, or spending more time on,
Adoption of the
yeah,
thing, whatever it is. Yeah. I mean,
absolutely. But that idea that if we need, potentially we will need more developers, because probably 10 times as much code is going to exist. I'm sure it's more than that, but say 100 times more code that can be produced. And now what are you going to do with all that code? We're
how are
definitely
you
going to need to
starting?
figure out with
I mean,
adoption and building
just in the
solutions.
last couple of years, though, I mean, with some of your travels, I mean, so we've started to see, with AI rollout, Copilot, of course, a big push and stuff with Microsoft's investments along all of that. How is that? Have you already started to see that uh, impacting collaboration across different cultures? How are you seeing that impact?
So travelers absolutely are using Gen AI to plan their trips. Like I'm going to Japan this summer with the family. We're going to go to the Worldwide Expo, and just trying to figure out where are the right hotels, where are the right places to stay. But my ability to say, hey, Copilot, or here, hey, ChatGPT, plan out a 7-day trip or a 2-week trip on these parts. And oh, by the way, I want to do this, and I want to do this, and I want to do this. And its ability to kind of cater it based on the world's knowledge. And then my ability, once I even get that, to be able to say, no, 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 tweak it like this. No, 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 tweak it like that. And being able to get a very rich itinerary, and from a business perspective, being able to say, hey, it's now an itinerary, a fairly rich itinerary. I can then flip over to somebody else. And I think that example in travel translates very well to so much parts of our business, where it's like a lawyer who's doing research on a case. Yes, absolutely use those tools to do the research, but do not, please do not, like, take that carte blanche and go and build your case and then use the references and then to find out there's some hallucinations in there. Anything is kind of trust but verify in anything we do, but at the same time it's getting better and better as we go as well.
Yeah. Well, I know that one of the issues is changing that the culture. I mean, it's you're changing the work culture to adopt new technologies has been a difficult time for everybody. I was interviewing Jeff Teeper a couple years ago, who's the president of collaborative apps at Microsoft, so SharePoint and Teams and Copilot and kind of everything that's under that.
The
And
Godfather.
we were talking about the adoption of cloud. And so when we were working together, it was like
Yeah.
still the beginning of that. I mean, even before I entered, kind of the end of the introduction of SaaS solutions, the end of the 90s and early 2000s. And so in 2001, I went to work for E2Open, and we built this, a dedicated cloud collaboration platform. And so it was just like at Microsoft, I joined the team that Joel was on. It was MMS and then BPOS. Most people
Yeah.
know the BPOS acronym. And again, dedicated cloud, like that side of it. Like, so for a long time, for me, since 2001, been trying to convince people it's safe to move to the cloud. So I
Yeah.
asked
Yeah.
Jeff Teeper, I said, when did you feel like the majority accepted that message? And he says took till like 2016, 2017 to where I really felt like this is now accepted, that it's secure, it's safe, and value
It's
to use the
it's
cloud.
interesting because I remember around the same time where it was like there were strong voices on both sides. And then I saw something tick quite a few years earlier than that, where I felt like from in the influencer space, once we have enough influencers that are all saying, no, the cloud is the right way to go, it scales, it's more supportable, it's more reliable, and the companies are going to be able to invest more. The more secure came a little bit later, but Microsoft themselves basically said, you know what, we're going to take this serious. It's the only way people are going to take us serious. So they took a more significant set of their budget and said, we're going to go spend this on security because it needs to be that there's no way that your on-prem is more secure than our cloud environment.
Yeah.
And so that was a big deal. And there was that tipping point of, hey, I don't care what you say, this is more secure. I've actually had a conversation like that a couple of weeks ago with somebody who was working on something on prem, and I'm like, hey, sorry, that is not, you can't use that excuse, because guess what, the company that built that software that's on your servers, who also has a SaaS version, has all the incentive to invest in their SaaS based subscription version. And if there's 10% that are on-prem, guess what's going to get neglected? That on-prem and the patching in that on-prem. And sure, they may learn a lot, and they're doing a ton more A/B in they're going to get all the features. And I've very much been noticing that on-prem version doesn't have all the newest, latest, greatest security features because they first build them. And the cloud first mentality was really what pushed it in a big way. It's like, if all the features go to cloud first, why would we think that we're better off with on-prem?
Are you seeing differences globally in with AI? Like, is there resistance versus enthusiasm in different
Yeah.
regions? Are there places like because I was thinking about, but as we were starting to talk before we started recording, was thinking about how like the African continent, like how much they were so ahead in mobile applications because
Yeah.
they didn't have to lay ground though the wires and all the things, the infrastructure that we have in other parts of the Western world. Like they were setting up towers, and suddenly everybody could have a phone that is able to do these smartphones and do things. And so apps are just popping up everywhere.
Huge,
And
huge.
AI, which is much more intensive, compute intensive, and all that, with all the network that needs the bandwidth, needs all of those things. Like, is it impacting? Are they behind the rest of the world because of that lack of traditional infrastructure?
Yeah. Come on in, please. Um, yeah, it was basically, uh, I think that absolutely that idea that there's like the copper that had to have been laid versus the, hey, if we go mobile first, if we go cloud first, we're already there. It's huge. It's so much faster, so much. I gotta grab the door. 1 second. Come on in. Yeah, come on in. I'm on a call. Go ahead.
It's the real world, people. Stuff like that
Real world.
happens.
Yeah.
UPS
Yeah.
shows up, somebody else shows up. Yep.
So what I was going to say was, I think that AI is one of those things as well, where the internet, there's the digital divide, I think, is the big thing. Where in Africa, there's a major digital divide where there's those who know of and can take advantage of the technology, and it's going to move them so much faster. And I think that Nigeria and is a good example of a place where, hey, let's get our youth educated. Let's get them on the internet. Let's take advantage of it. And they've got this mass population. And that idea that invest in education and the internet being a mechanism for being able to have access to the world's knowledge.
Mhm.
And what it's going to do is, the sooner that the entire globe can realize that it's a tutor, it's going to make the world a much, much smaller place. And
Yeah.
so that digital divide can essentially shrink in a major way. if people can get access to that virtual assistant, that virtual tutor, where today we invest so much in teaching and the ability where people don't have access to a teacher, that people can essentially leverage AI in teaching. It's going to be major. That how AI plays out in education is going to be huge in terms
I
of how the
I
world
think the
comes
two
smartly.
biggest sectors, education, yes, because there's a lot of people. In fact, I think I just saw like somebody in my network just announced that they moved over to take a role in collaboration technology over in the with an education system, a network of schools to go build the next best like learning platform. That's been, in fact, with collaboration technology. While for vendors that sell software and solutions into that area, education historically has not been a big moneymaker for that. They greatly reduced licensing for like that sector. It's similar to probably second only to nonprofits. But a lot of innovation of how do you secure this? Like I love during the pandemic seeing questions out in user groups around SharePoint and Teams and other stuff of teachers that were being forced to really experience every feature of the platforms, saying like, how do I keep my students from doing this? Like
Yeah.
I love.
That's one of the things that's most frustrating to me is I see in my kid who's a sophomore in high school, he's working on AP World History, and his assignments are very much very heady. There's a lot of like, um, read this entire chapter and then summarize and fill out this thing or write this build a map that has this kind of detail in it. And I
Mhm.
look at how frustrating it is and how much homework there is in something like that, where I think, man, if this was an AI tutor that he was using, it would be so much more pleasant to consume that kind of information, where you could do the little quizzes and be able to help him understand who Genghis Khan is with a fun little video, and
Yeah.
the idea of being able to figure out, well, what is he interested in as we go through world history, so that he can better understand and embrace it, and being able to see the foods and the cultures, and instead it's like sticking your head in a book, and those books are so flat.
Yeah.
And his teacher, oh, there is so much resistance to AI. It's, oh, that's the cheating tool, is kind of how they have this perception of that's how you cheat. It's
Well,
not how you learn. And the sooner that our education system can actually learn and understand how to adopt and understand this is a tool, this is the calculator. Way back in the day, it was like, how many math classes were we in where they were like, do not use calculators, or calculators are evil? It's
show
like,
your work. That's
show your
right.
work.
Yep.
And I understand for the test how that's applicable, but how much of our ability to understand and grasp concepts and to move quickly, that in the real world, guess what? You are going to have access to that calculator. And I have had some teachers in college where it was like assigned and required to have a calculator.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be great if in our high school class that there was the class where, guess what, Gen AI is part of what you're doing, and you're going to use it for your creative, and you're going to use it to produce a video, and you're going to use it to produce images? Because guess what, in the real world, we're adults and we got to figure this stuff out. And how sad is it if a kid goes through their education, learns all the resistance of, oh, these are evil, and it's like, no, this is actually how you really get your work done. Use the calculator, use the tool, use the Gen AI to be able to get your work done even quicker.
Yeah. It makes me think, doing my managerial finance and accounting in my MBA program. I'm like, what are we doing here? And we were
Yeah,
required to
yeah,
go purchase the HB12C and learn how to use this complex, financial calculator and do
yeah.
this. And they even said we had these discussions during the program. Like, this is insane. Like,
You're not going to really need this.
why am I
Right.
learning about double entry? I will never use that. And the teacher said, you might. I'm like, no, I won't.
No.
35 years later, I've never done double entry, never needed to do that. but I was
Yeah.
able to go in and show like, look, I could do these using Excel.
Excel. Right. Right. And if you could do it with Excel, just think what you could do saying, hey, ChatGPT, help me analyze this. And let's learn the language of what needs to be done here. Help me understand the mean and the min and the max and the standard deviation, and help me understand this data that I'm looking at. But I think some of it is just the language and the manipulation of it. That the sooner we can learn how to be, and it's not that I want to overuse the word prompt engineer, but it is a lot about our ability to understand and work with data, and our ability to be able to stand on top of this as a tool.
Yeah.
If you're just thinking about it in terms of basic terms, you're going to only get so far with AI.
Yeah.
But if you can actually learn how to use it as a tool, man, it's going to be, you'll go so much further.
Hey Joel, I would with a couple minutes that we have left. I
Yep.
do want to kind of go back and look at kind of the universal elements of collaboration, and despite all of the cultural and technological differences and high bandwidth, low bandwidth, kind of all those fun things that we've
Yeah.
had experiences with, what are some of the constants that you see in collaboration wherever you go? These same pieces are there.
I like that. I like that. I think that some of the things that we find is the receptiveness. Like when you're out finding a community, you'll find that there's some person who is interested in the message, somebody who has incentive to rise up and wants to connect. And I think it's a matter of finding those super connectors around the globe, or in your industry, or in your company,
The
or in your
champions,
department.
right, and
It
support
is
the
very
champions.
much, it is this champions. It's
Yep.
the center of excellence. How do you find the gravity in your organization? Where do you find those champions? Who are the people who are the ones who are asking all the questions? And then it's kind of finding that center of gravity, and essentially getting something that gels, and that does have that spark. I like at Sony that are, I'm trying to remember the word, and it's not coming to me, but essentially that spark is really what our vision is about. It's that, um, yeah, it's not hitting me. Anyway, we'll have to put that in the notes. But there's this thing that is the light, how the light comes on, and the joy and the happiness that it brings, and essentially it's, I think that it's that in our energy. It's like we talk about passion and energy and momentum, and we talk about physics of, it's like those things that are moving and continue to move. And I think it's that finding where that kind of physics is in your organization, in the collaboration you do, and especially around the globe, is it's the inertia. There's certain people who just have a lot of energy,
Yeah.
and what I found in my own teams, as I build teams, I'm looking for the movers. Who are the people who are willing to move a big rock? I want them to be on my team. I want those people who have passion and energy and that spark to life. And it's often hard for me when I find somebody on my team, like say I'm inheriting a team. I can find those who are willing to pick up the whatever and run with it, and I get excited about those folks. Then there's those who are, oh, you know what? Legal's going to give me a problem with that. I'm not going to push that. Or you know what? InfoSec is going to push back on that. It's like, no, no, no. We got it. We got to figure out what are the big rocks we want to move? And it's going to take some inertia. It's going to take some momentum to be able to push and lean, or put our shoulder in and push.
You just reminded me. So there's a conversation, you may not remember it, but in those couple months we shared an office, we were sitting and having a conversation because when I entered Microsoft, I brought a bunch of IP. I had been blogging already for several years, and but I brought some like a former company and some other IP and things that I want to be careful of. And we had a whole conversation about like needing to go. I said, well, I want to still be out there blogging about it. And there was like, I remember from our manager, like, we need to go talk to LCA. I think in
Yeah.
your advice was a variation of it's better to ask forgiveness than permission.
Yes.
But it
Yes.
was because I can't remember the timing of when Robert Scoble like left. Like
Yeah.
it was right
Yeah.
around, I think he left right before I joined. And that was like one of the complaints that he had. It was like Microsoft saying, like, you can't be out blogging about stuff. He's like, stop me. I'm doing it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
not, no, but we're not talking about sharing IP and stuff. It's
Right.
sharing opinion and things that are out there. But anyway, yeah, not being afraid to go out there and try and building that into your culture. Let people experiment and let people speak up and share their opinions if they vehemently disagree with you on something, to not be
Yeah.
afraid to voice that opinion. Um, we've both worked in organizations where like you could not say those things if you valued your position.
I find as well, there's like, if it's hard or if something's not working, let's document the process, and then let's bring some transparency to it, and kind of talking that same framework of, hey, we want to make sure that you're not sharing IP outside the organization. Well, then maybe what we need to do is come up with a form that where you can have an approval and you can have somebody who can understand what are the opportunities and how this actually helps the organization. And if it helps to have someone give you a thumbs up, so be it. But that idea of working out in the open at some level brings it bears a lot of fruit, because you can get the feedback, you can get
Yep.
people who can give you ideas, and you're gonna rise above and improve the situation you're in. And the more, it's that idea of like, there's the spark, and when you get a bunch of sparks together, you get a fire. And I think it's that kind of thing that through my career, it's finding the people who have the inertia and the energy, getting those people together. And if you're just heads down, it's going to be slow moving, and you're not going to find the energy that you need to make things pop.
You have your last statement here. One piece of advice for professionals working with global teams and AI and getting them to adopt AI. What's your advice?
I think that in the bearing of it grows. And so essentially people are looking for case studies. So I do think that the stories can be super powerful. And so if you're a global team and you're trying to get people to adopt it, they need to hear your stories. So collecting your stories, collecting your use cases, talking about personas, the more that you can understand, hey, in HR, here's somebody who's been using it successfully. Well, let's capture that story and share it. You're working on a team and you're using it for documentation. Hey, let's figure out how did it help you with your documentation. You know what? It's like, I had a bunch of ideas, and then I said, as an architect, write this document about XYZ. It spits out a couple pages. Now you're going in and you're editing it. How much time did that save you? It's use cases, scenarios, just like we are used to in any kind of marketing. But I think that the key here is in finding where things are working and then kind of highlighting those.
Yeah. Well, hey, that's always good, especially if you're lower down the organization.
And
Documenting those wins, those successes is going to
talking
help
about
you. Yeah.
absolutely. And I was just going to say one last kind of thing is like, as we talk about people around the world, people who are kind of feeling like, I'm under the radar, I want to do something with my career, I want to be something more. You find that energy and passion inside of you, and now go and do and accomplish more and find a way. I had a boss who told me, he's like, you could go and take a motorcycle and jump over the Snake River and no one would even know. And if you fell to the bottom and died, it would be a
Because
disaster
that's
and
what
no
would
one would
happen.
know.
That's what,
Yeah. Or
Here, Joel,
could make
100%. That's what would happen if you tried.
yes, that would happen. That would happen. Evil Knievel prove that. But what you can also do is make a big spectacle and help people understand the significance of what you're doing and how powerful it is. And you line up that audience, and then the energy of the feat itself can be so much more powerful. So essentially, that idea that you're soaring on a motorcycle across this mass expanse is greater than even whether you do it or not. It doesn't matter, because the event was so fantastic and spectacular.
Yeah. There's a movie about that, it's called Hot Rod.
Hot Rod. I love that.
If you don't know, folks, that movie, it's an important American film. Andy Samberg, you're definitely good to go watch it. So it's up there with, Ben-Hur and Blade Runner and what's the one? Rosebud. Yeah. Important. Everyone needs to see it.
Yes, exactly. Some classics.
Well, Joel, really appreciate your time.
Good times.
See you in a
Thanks
couple
for
weeks,
inviting
too.
me, Christian. Good stuff. Good stuff.
You've been listening to the CollabTalk podcast. New episodes are published weekly, and you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcast, iHeartRadio, and most other podcast platforms. Thanks for listening.